3 years ago, Vivian stood outside the heavy oak door of her son's suburban duplex, holding a warm casserole dish for their housewarming dinner. Camille opened the door just a few inches, blocking the entrance completely with a tight, artificial smile. "You cannot come inside today," Camille said coldly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Our apartment is way too small, and your old-fashioned energy just throws off our entire aesthetic." Grant stood nervously behind his wife, whispering apologies while refusing to look his mother in the eye. Camille clicked the deadbolt shut in Vivian's face, leaving her alone on the porch with the cooling casserole. Vivian did not cry or bang on this door. She simply turned around, walked back to her sedan, and drove away. She never forgot the humiliation of being locked out of her own son's home by an arrogant daughter-in-law who despised her background. Fast forward to the present day, Vivian lived comfortably inside her newly acquired $1 million stone mansion nestled in the quiet hills of Westchester County. She had purchased the grand estate entirely with her own accumulated savings and the smart sale of her late husband's hardware business. Camille had no idea Vivian possessed such wealth, assuming her mother-in-law was entirely dependent on a meager pension. Vivian spent her mornings tending to her expansive rose garden, enjoying the deep peace she had earned through decades of grueling labor. Her life was orderly, calm, and entirely self-sufficient, far away from the petty snobbery of her son's marital household. But karma has a quiet way of turning the wheel, and the past rarely stays buried forever. On a freezing autumn afternoon, the grand iron gate of Vivian's driveway buzzed loudly, breaking the serene silence. Vivian wiped her gardening gloves, walked over to the intercom screen, and pressed the answer button. Camille stood shivering on the grand stone porch of the $1 million mansion, staring up at the towering mahogany double doors. Her designer wool coat was splattered with highway slush, and her hair was plastered to her face by the biting rain. Beside her stood two massive, dented suitcases, packed hastily with things that no longer mattered. Vivian watched the security camera feed from her kitchen monitor, her expression entirely unreadable as she sipped her tea. 3 years ago, Camille had slammed a door in her face. Today, the exact same woman was ringing her bell. Vivian pressed the gate release button, walking slowly to the grand entryway with deliberate, unhurried steps. She unlocked the heavy deadbolt, pulled the door open, and looked down at her uninvited daughter-in-law. Camille gasped, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief as she recognized the luxurious marble foyer and crystal chandelier. "You live here," Camille whispered, her voice cracking as she instinctively reached out to step inside the warmth. Vivian raised her hand, blocking the threshold with her palm, exactly as Camille had done years ago. "You cannot come inside today, Camille," Vivian said calmly, throwing her former words right back at her. "Our foyer is way too clean, and your desperate energy would completely throw off our entire aesthetic." Grant stood a few paces behind his wife, looking completely hollowed out, soaked to the bone, and utterly defeated. "Mom, please," Grant choked out, his shoulders shaking as he avoided his mother's steady gaze. "We have nowhere left to go. We lost everything, and we just need a place to stay." Camille dropped to her knees on the pristine welcome mat, tears streaming down her pale, makeup-stained cheeks. "Please, Vivian." "Just give us one room?" Camille sobbed, clutching the hem of Vivian's cardigan frantically. Vivian looked down at the woman who had once treated her like an unwanted pest in a tiny rental apartment. Vivian did not budge an inch, keeping her hand firmly planted against the doorframe to block the entrance. The autumn wind whistled through the stone pillars, carrying the biting chill of an approaching evening storm. "You made your rules very clear 3 years ago," Vivian said, in a measured, even tone. "You taught me that private spaces belong exclusively to those who own and respect them." Grant stepped forward, his hands trembling as he tried to lift his weeping wife back up to her feet. "We made terrible financial choices." Mom, Grant admitted, his voice hollow and thick with deep regret. "My business failed. Our rental lease was terminated and our bank accounts were nearly gone. Camille buried her face in her hands, her once arrogant posture completely broken by the harsh weight of reality. We thought you lived on a fixed pension in a small, cramped cottage. Camille whimpered miserably. We never knew you owned this place. We thought you had nothing to offer us anymore. Vivian listened to the confession, feeling neither pity nor malice, only a cold, sharp clarity of mind. Wealth is never measured by what people show you, Camille, but by what they quietly build behind closed doors. You judged me by my old clothes and my simple car, forgetting that foundations are poured in silence. Grant looked around the grand courtyard, finally realizing the immense gulf between his choices and his mother's strength. Please just let us sleep in the guest house or the garage. Grant pleaded, his voice cracking desperately. Vivian shook her head slowly, her expression remaining as immovable as the stone walls around them. My home is not a charity shelter for people who only remember my address during their darkest storms. But I will not let you freeze on my front steps either. Humanity requires a basic floor of decency. Vivian pointed down the long driveway toward the detached heated pool house near the rear garden gate. You can stay in the pool house for precisely 48 hours on my strict terms. Grant hauled the two heavy suitcases across the wet cobblestone path toward the secluded glass pool house. Camille followed closely behind her high heels, clicking awkwardly against the stone as she sneered at the luxury. The pool house was fully heated, featuring a comfortable studio bed, a private bathroom, and a small kitchenette. It was nicer than the apartment Camille had forced Grant to rent when they first married. Vivian watched from her kitchen window as they settled in, ensuring they had dry towels and bottled water. She did not visit them that evening, choosing instead to sit quietly by her fireplace with a good book. Years ago, when Grant had married Camille, Vivian had tried desperately to win her daughter-in-law's affection. She had baked pies, offered financial help for their first down payment, and invited them to every holiday dinner. Camille had rejected every gesture, convincing Grant to distance himself from his widowed mother to climb social ladders. Now, those same social ladders had collapsed, leaving them trapped in the wreckage of their own superficial ambitions. The next morning broke bright and cold, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the estate. Vivian poured her morning coffee and sat at her kitchen island, reviewing her weekly investment portfolio statements. A soft knock sounded at the main kitchen door, interrupting her quiet routine of checking market trends. Vivian opened the door to find Grant standing alone on the patio, looking exhausted and deeply ashamed. Mom, thank you for letting us use the pool house, Grant said softly, staring down at his coffee mug. Camille is inside packing her remaining bags. She has decided to return to her parents out west. Vivian took a slow sip of her coffee, nodding as she processed the predictable news without surprise. People who build relationships on convenience rarely weather the first real storm together, Grant. Grant leaned against the doorframe, running a tired hand through his thinning hair as he exhaled deeply. I wasted years trying to appease her, Mom, Grant confessed, his voice breaking with suppressed emotion. I ignored you, I shut you out of my life, and I let her treat you like an invisible nuisance. And I let it happen because I was too weak to stand up for the woman who raised me. Vivian set her mug down on the marble counter, looking directly into her son's troubled, tear-filled eyes. Acknowledging a mistake is the first step toward maturity, Grant, but accountability requires real action. You are 38 years old. It is time you stopped letting your life be dictated by someone else's vanity. What are your plans now that the boutique business and your marriage have completely dissolved? Grant swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as he tried to steady his trembling voice before answering her question. I secured a job offer as a warehouse operations manager in Ohio starting next month, Grant said quietly. It is a modest salary, but it is an honest start, and I can rebuild my life from scratch. Vivian felt a sudden wave of maternal warmth, not because he was suffering, but because he was finally growing up. That sounds like a solid, realistic plan, Vivian said with a gentle nod of approval. You have my full blessing to pursue it, but you will be driving there entirely on your own terms. Camille walked up the steps behind Grant, carrying her designer handbag with a cold, hardened expression. She did not look at Vivian, refusing to offer even a basic ounce of courtesy or acknowledgement. "My ride is waiting down at the gate," Camille announced sharply, her tone still laced with defiant pride. "Grant, are you coming with me, or are you staying here to listen to more lectures?" Grant turned around, slowly looking at his estranged wife with a calm, unfamiliar sense of absolute detachment. "I am not coming with you," Camille Grant said clearly, his voice steady for the first time in years. "We are done. I am driving to Ohio by myself tomorrow morning to start my new life." Camille stared at Grant in utter disbelief, her mouth parting slightly as she realized her control had vanished. "You are abandoning me now when I need you most?" Camille screeched, her voice rising in defensive panic. "After everything I built for us, you are just going to throw it all away for an old woman?" Vivian remained silent inside the doorway, letting her son handle his own marital wreckage without interference. "This marriage ended the moment we went broke, and you started packing your bags for your parents' house," Grant replied. "I am taking responsibility for my mistakes, Camille. You should try doing the exact same thing." Camille slammed her designer bag against her thigh, turned on her heel, and marched down the driveway. She did not look back once as she trudged toward the waiting rideshare vehicle parked at the security gate. Grant watched her leave, feeling a profound sense of lightness wash over his tired, overburdened shoulders. He turned back to face his mother, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his exhaustion. "You were right about her, all along," Mom Grant whispered, shaking his head in quiet self-reproach. "I was blinded by her charm and her obsession with status symbols that meant nothing. Wisdom cannot be taught, Grant. It has to be earned through painful personal experience," Vivian replied softly. "Go pack the rest of your belongings from the pool house and get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow is the first day of your real life, and you have a long, clear road ahead of you." Grant nodded gratefully, walking back across the cobblestone courtyard toward the pool house with renewed purpose. Vivian closed the kitchen door, locking it securely before turning back to her peaceful, sunlit home. She felt no triumph, only a deep, quiet satisfaction that boundaries had finally restored proper order. The million-dollar mansion stood strong behind her, a true fortress built on decades of resilience and self-respect. The crisp winter air settled over Westchester County, coating the sprawling lawns in a blanket of pristine snow. Vivian spent her days managing her personal investments, volunteering at the local library, and enjoying her solitude. She had not heard from Camille since the day her former daughter-in-law took a rideshare out west. Word trickled back through distant relatives that Camille had moved back into her parents' suburban basement. Her luxury boutique dreams had evaporated into heavy debt, leaving her with nothing but bitter memories. Grant had moved to Ohio 3 months prior, calling his mother every Sunday evening without fail. He had rented a clean, modest apartment near his logistics warehouse and was slowly paying off his debts. He no longer chased after superficial prestige or allowed toxic relationships to dictate his daily happiness. Vivian sat by her living room window, knitting a warm wool scarf while watching the winter birds feed outside. Her life had returned to its peaceful rhythm, untainted by drama manipulation or forced disrespect. The million-dollar mansion was no longer just a physical asset, but a symbol of absolute emotional freedom. She walked over to her mahogany desk, opening a drawer to file away her monthly financial statements neatly. Among the papers lay a small photograph of her late husband, smiling warmly beside their first hardware store. They had built everything from scratch enduring hardship without ever losing their personal dignity or core values. Vivian smiled softly at the picture, knowing she had made the right choices when the storms hit. The front doorbell rang softly, echoing through the high-ceilinged foyer with a gentle, welcoming chime. She set her knitting needles down on the side table and walked slowly toward the front door. Vivian opened the front door to find Grant standing on the porch, stamping snow off his winter boots. He looked healthier, broader in the shoulders, and carried a simple box of bakery pastries in his hands. "Hey," Mom Grant said, with a warm, genuine smile stepping inside the grand entryway. "I brought cinnamon rolls from that little bakery you love down in the village." Vivian took the box from his hands, feeling a deep wave of maternal pride as she looked at him. "Come in, out of the cold, Grant. The house is warm and the coffee is already freshly brewed." They walked into the sunlit kitchen, sitting together at the marble island, just like old times. Grant talked about his new promotion at the logistics center and his weekend woodworking hobby in his apartment. He was learning how to build small furniture pieces by hand, discovering the joy of honest craftsmanship. "You know, Mom, I finally understand why you guarded your home and your peace so fiercely," Grant admitted. "When you build something with your own hands and sweat, you cannot let anyone destroy it carelessly. It took you a while to learn that lesson, Grant, but wisdom always demands a heavy tuition fee. I am just glad you paid it before it was too late to salvage your own life and character." They spent the afternoon talking about books, gardening plans, and upcoming spring home improvement projects. There was no tension in the air, no walking on eggshells, and no toxic underlying friction anywhere. When evening approached, Grant stood up to leave, packing his coat carefully for the long drive back. He hugged his mother tightly, holding her for a long moment before walking out to his sedan. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was a complete fool," Grant said softly. "I will see you next Sunday, Grant." "Drive carefully," Vivian replied, watching his car disappear down the drive. Spring returned to the Hudson Valley with an explosion of vibrant green leaves and blooming pink dogwood trees. Vivian walked through her sprawling rose garden, pruning stray branches with a pair of sharp stainless steel shears. Her life had settled into a rhythm of absolute grace, purpose, and unshakable personal autonomy. She no longer worried about what others thought of her background, her age, or her financial status. The $1 million mansion stood as a testament to her endurance, completely insulated from petty human drama. Local neighbors frequently stopped by to admire her landscaping, engaging in pleasant, respectful conversations at her gate. She had built a tight-knit community of friends who valued her intellect, her kindness, and her quiet strength. Grant visited every other weekend, now fully established in his new career and completely self-reliant. He had even started dating a kind, grounded woman who worked as a local elementary school art teacher. Vivian never interfered in his new relationship, knowing that he had finally learned how to choose wisely. She sat down on her wrought iron garden bench, breathing in the sweet scent of freshly turned spring soil. Her phone buzzed in her cardigan pocket with a cheerful text message notification from her son. He sent a picture of a handmade oak bookshelf he had just finished building in his apartment. Vivian smiled brightly, typing back a short note of encouragement and praising his craftsmanship. She set her phone down on the wooden slats, looking out over the peaceful expanse of her estate. Everything in her world was balanced, earned, and fiercely protected against any future storms. The golden afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across the polished hardwood floors of the grand foyer. Vivian stood by the front window, watching a pair of robins build a nest in the oak tree. Her life was entirely her own, governed by her rules, her boundaries, and her quiet dignity. She had walked through the fire of family rejection and financial arrogance without ever losing her footing. Camille remained a distant, faded memory in a distant state, tangled in the consequences of her own making. Grant was thriving on his own 2 feet, respecting his mother not out of obligation, but genuine love. Vivian walked over to her favorite armchair, picking up her favorite hardcover book of historical essays. She opened to a marked page, letting the quiet solitude wrap around her like a warm, comforting blanket. The heavy front door remained firmly closed against past insults, yet wide open to a peaceful future. She did not need anyone's validation, anyone's approval, or anyone's permission to live her life fully. Her million-dollar mansion was much more than a collection of expensive stone glass and expensive timber. It was a physical monument to a woman who refused to be broken by disrespect or small-mindedness. Vivian turned the page quietly, her heart light, and her mind completely at peace with the world. The story of her life had entered its finest chapter, written entirely by her own steady hand. She smiled gently into the fading afternoon light, completely content with the sanctuary she had built. The wind rustled softly through the garden outside, carrying the sweet promise of tomorrow. Vivian closed her book for a moment, whispering a silent word of gratitude for her hard-won freedom.